Hello and welcome to another episode of Don't Let's Interrupt You. I'm Sushi, and with me, of course, is...
I'm the Swordfish. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
Not bad. Just ready for this podcast. Looking forward to it.
Yep, for sure. This one we've had a lot of back and forth trying to get this one on the road, so I'm glad we're finally getting to put this one to the recording, and let's get right into it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So today we're looking at two pretty popular NES titles, formerly arcade games, and that is Contra and Super C, two games that you and I have a lot of personal experience with. We won't get into too much of that, but we're going to kind of, I don't know if it's so much a debate so much as we're just going to put some points together as to maybe why one game would be a little bit stronger than the other. There are a lot of similarities between the two games. However, there are some differences that some people might enjoy one versus the other.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one, and I think it's just going to be a good debate. And I think, the cool point about it is that in this whole community, watching on YouTube, looking at, Reddit boards online, is Super C itself has kind of gained kind of a cult following. Contra's always been kind of the more well-known game and the game that everybody's gravitated to, but there's been a lot of people over the last couple of years that have really talked about Super C and given it the credit I think it deserves.
Yeah, fair enough. And truthfully, as we just stated, this is like a pair of games that really kind of go hand in hand. They didn't come around at the exact same time frame. Like there was a gap in time between the two games, but so much of the flow of the game, the structure is very similar. And so if you've played one, you should likely be able to pick up the other and feel quite familiar with how the flow of the game is, the controls and everything. After these two games, the console Contra games really kind of shift into a little bit different level of speed and colors and things like that. Obviously, we're not going to go into those, but you've seen a pretty big shift once Contra 3: The Alien Wars comes out after these two games.
No, it's a really good point, but I think that point alone of just how the shift and everything you talked about graphically, sound-wise, changed is there's a reason that there's a nostalgia for these games, and I think it's just that pick up and play. When you think of that, it's immediately something like Contra where you can spend 10-15 minutes and you know you're going to have a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny how these two games set up the franchise in kind of a different pathway, because even though the arcade games are truly the first in the series, I don't think a lot of people have a lot of fond memories necessarily of those two games compared to these. And after playing the arcade games a little bit, even though the template is very similar to these, and obviously these could not compare graphically and the audio and so forth, going from an arcade game to a Nintendo Entertainment System game, the overall structure is there. But those arcade games, they feel almost twice as hard to me, just because of the character sprites are so big and the flow of the bullets on those and everything. So it's interesting how they changed those formats to the NES, and generally speaking, it feels as if more people have a lot of fond memories with the NES titles rather than the arcade.
Yeah, and I think those are kind of points we're going to touch upon, because I really do think that you can see how the developers looked at Super C compared to Contra, and how Contra was more similar to the arcade, in that just kind of your platforming, a little bit more difficulty, just you had to slow things down a little bit, whereas Super C, I think they really went with the strengths of the NES and said, let's just make, kind of a more streamlined port and bring out something that I think the fans are going to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, so we're going to try to hit 3 points each. I'm going to be defending, or I guess arguing, if you will, for Contra, and you're taking Super C. So I guess I'll start, since Contra was the first released game. And I think for me, one of the biggest strengths for Contra is again, it does really set the template for what the franchise is going to be like from that point on. Yes, we do get some variants along the way, such as Hardcore, and then Hardcore Uprising, which is a Contra game, just doesn't have the Contra title in it. but and those kind of are a little bit variants, I suppose. As is one of my favorite that nobody seems to like is Neo Contra. But just the overall structure of Contra really kind of boils down to that first NES title. And even though it is similar to the arcade, it adds a different flow to how the game is played. And so a lot of the, I guess, the iconic set pieces of Contra do kind of come up throughout all of the games after, and it just sets that whole template for what the franchise would be.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it just goes to show you how well received that game was, and I think it created a fanfare that I think you can't deviate too far away. We've seen iterations of this game come out where they've tried to mess around with the format. Mm-hmm. I think of kind of Legacy of War.
Yeah, those PlayStation ones.
Yeah, something where they tried to, up the graphics a little bit more, go into like a 3D format, and fans have ultimately pushed it back, and we can look at games such as like Contra 4, mm-hmm. and just how they went back to the original format. And I think, as I said before, and this will be kind of a overlying theme on this, is just the overall pick up and play attitude of these games, of just when you start the game, you know exactly what to do, 2 buttons, you're ready to go. And I think, as you get into Super Nintendo, Genesis, you obviously have buttons that were for to change weapons, but the format still stayed the same. 2 buttons, let's go, and we know where we're going, and we're going from a left to right format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And just this game sets up so many of the future aspects. Like, even when I think of Super C, even though the stages are different, there are parts of those stages that feel like they're variants or B-sides, if you will, of Contra. Like the waterfall stage. I would say probably the two, to me, in the first game, the probably 2 most iconic stages would be that first jungle stage, which, again, some people didn't even get past because, this is a pretty difficult game. And then the third stage with the waterfall, I feel, and even the waterfall kind of comes up in Contra 4, right? Like, it's the second half of the second stage.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the I guess the icons of this franchise really stem from that first game and that stupid first boss, right, where you can destroy all the turrets on there, and then the guy up top, and then you've got just like a wall standing in front of you. You can destroy the panel or whatever. I think there's just a lot of fond memories of learning how to play this game, and a lot of people maybe not getting very far after the first stage. But it's just, yeah.
I think that point, as you're talking about just the game, the fond memories, it brings back a lot of memories for me of like those Nintendo games, and I think of games like Ninja Gaiden, and just those type of games where even though it was hard and you had to repeat stages, you never minded when you had to go back and really keep on playing these stages and getting better and better, and you'd go and talk to your friends about getting to the next stage, and just seeing a new stage, for the first time, those things, I think that's why it just keeps on building in terms of the nostalgia and how people look back on these games.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, for sure. And then I think, even though it's not something, I know when you and I play, we don't use the Konami code, but obviously the Konami code is extremely associated with the Contra franchise, even though it originated on Gradius. However, it seems it's become synonymous with the first Contra game, that, there's a 30 lives code, here's how you do it, up, up, down, down. And everybody's kind of tied that to the first Contra game. So I think that's also kind of added to that. I don't know if it's mystique or just the memory or the nostalgia of the first Contra title, and also just the way the screen slides in, and then you get your do 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 do, and then the explosion.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we didn't get. I've seen the Japanese release, and they have some of those cool cutscenes and stuff that we didn't see in the North American release, unfortunately. But I think there's a piece that sits in and resonates with people, and I think it can't be denied that Contra has a very high nostalgia factor for many people.
No, and I think that one extra point to make alongside that is it has that 80s action movie trope.
Yeah.
Of just every young boy, teenage boy that sees a game like this, you want to pick up and play, and you want to enjoy it because you think of all your Schwarzenegger, your Stallone, your Van Damme. It goes on and on, where it's just fun to have a machine gun and go fight somebody.
I noticed you didn't bring up Stevie.
Well, I didn't see any roundhouse kicks or using pool balls in Contra, so.
That's true. And I don't think Steven Seagal ever did fight aliens or anything that I can recall.
Yeah, and Van Damme, I mean Universal Soldier, but that's a different podcast.
Yeah, those are all going to be different podcasts. All right, what would you say would be your first kind of point you wanted to make for Super C?
I think the first point that I'd go on is I love the arcade feel of Super C.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, just as you mentioned, these are arcade ports. I feel like Contra, and especially playing through it the last couple weeks, really getting through this podcast, you have to be deliberate on the first game.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be careful about bullets. There's a lot of bullets that are kind of, it's hard to see them, and then they'll come out of nowhere, especially kind of on your sub stages.
Mm-hmm.
Like your stage 2, your stage 4 you have to be a little bit more careful. And obviously speed runs can take this out of context, but I'd say for the normal player,
mm-hmm.
is playing through the game is sometimes there can be some frustrating parts.
Yep.
Where it's kind of a slow down approach, and you can get through things once you learn the patterns. But I'd say with Super C, the thing that I've always loved about it is it's very frenetic once you know what you're doing. You get the spread gun, you get the fireball, and once you start going, for instance, I'll make mention to any listener is play that first stage, get to the helicopter, and have a spread gun and have some fun just shooting that thing down in 5 seconds. And it just has that feel where it's just really streamlined, really arcade feel. And I think it goes a long way just in terms of having fun, whether you're by yourself or with another player.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Super C, it's odd, it's a good point you made that Super C's sort of slowly gaining more recognition, if you will, or a larger cult following. It seems a lot of people may not even recognize, for whatever reason, that Super C was the next Contra game. I don't know why they didn't call it Super Contra. I don't know if that has anything to do with the issue of the title of Contra to begin with. Yes, I can see that it's a little bit more, I don't know if you want to say user-friendly, but it doesn't feel as if the game is out to completely destroy you right from the start. Like the first few steps of Contra feel fine, but you're right, it's hard to see some of the bullets on some of those stages because they're just like little white dots that fly at you. So there's a different challenge in that. And that, again, you're right with how Super C just feels like it's sort of, you can kind of blaze through the game and be a little more reckless, it feels, compared to Contra.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And it just I feel that the game doesn't stop, whereas the sub-levels on Contra, you do have to take your time.
Mm-hmm.
And I always found myself wanting to get back to those levels. A good example would be the contrast between stage 4 and 5 of the original Contra.
Mm.
Whereas I think the snow stage with its music, with the bombs, it's everything that somebody would love Contra for.
Mm-hmm.
But stage 4, it feels like with a lot of the guards and a lot of things you have to do, it can become a little bit more frustrating. I don't know if that would be the right word, but I would say it just you just have to invest a little bit more in the game. Whereas with Super C, as I feel like a lot of the earlier stages allow you to get further into the game and just kind of have that destructive feel for just a longer period of time than Contra allows you to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Contra, the first game, is slowed down by those second and fourth stages quite significantly. And then, as you said earlier too, it does appear that the first Contra game has a bit more of a platforming type element to it, such as which stage is that? Is that stage 7? That has like those little rail car things that are driving by, and you have to sometimes jump on them to get higher to get a weapon that's above or whatever. So, and then Super C doesn't really incorporate that quite as much. Stage 4 does, but and stage 5 to some degree, but it feels like it's a little more naturally built into the gameplay to me, and sounds like to you as well.
Yeah, and I think again the platforming has never been a problem. I just feel that in terms of a game that just has just action in general, when you think of kind of an action game of what do you want from your Contra is basically the choice, and it's there's not a right answer, but I do feel that difference between the first and second stage on both games really sets the tone for what you're in for, and I do find myself wanting to go back to Super C a lot more, just because I know that when I'm going to play it, there's not going to be a point where a stray bullet's going to hit me, and we're gonna get to, again, something that I really appreciate, is being able to really destroy bosses in kind of a deliberate way. You can look at stage 3 of Super C, where it's those lasers that are coming down from kind of that kind of hanging, I don't know what you call it. It looks like a light a light bulb almost.
On Super C?
On Super C, yes.
Oh, so the stage 4, that chandelier laser thing?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, it's funny because that actually ties into what my next point is, and this is probably one of the points that I would think many Contra players actually like about the franchise, and that is the difficulty. And so the difficulty of Contra 1, whether you want to feel it's fair or unfair, such as the smaller bullets and the harder to see bullets and so forth, the stray bullets that seem to fly off the screen, the running soldiers that were just, they feel like they're, yes, there's running soldiers and aliens in Super C. Something about the speed of those guys in the first game, they just feel, and the way they jump. 1 minute you see them running towards you, but then they won't jump, and then they'll run back, and then they'll jump, and it just seems like they catch you like off guard more often than on Super C for me. However, it's that difficulty point. I think a lot of people, they like Contra for the difficulty. That people don't pick up a Contra game knowingly being, oh yeah, I just want an easy, laid back game, you know, whatever. It's not going to happen probably with Contra. You're going to have to be pretty aware of what you're doing. You can't just sit back after 10 beers and get through Contra really easily. Like, it's not that type of game. You pretty much have to have your wits about you the entire time you're playing. And the first Contra game, I feel it really pushes you. It pushes you to excel and be perfect at the game, essentially. Especially if you're playing without the 30 live code. And I know you and I can both beat Contra without the 30 live code. So you really have to know what you're doing if you want to get through it. And if you make one mistake, that can completely ruin your entire run, whether you have a spread gun or not. And really strong players will know how to recover without a spread gun, and usually know where the next spread gun is going to be, unless you have another weapon you prefer to use. Most people will use the spread gun, though. So I just feel that difficulty is actually a selling point for the first game, and really a lot of people might use that as like a badge of honor to finish Contra without the 30 live code, and maybe just run through with only the pea shooter or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point, and I can absolutely see that, and make no mistake, as I talk about kind of that flow, Contra definitely has that better positive feedback loop. When you beat a hard stage in Contra, whether it's the snowfield level 5 or whether it's the energy zone level 6, you feel like you've accomplished something. And so there's a reason it's a classic, and I think that harder difficulty, you need it in a game, and there's a reason why NES hard isn't a bad thing. it's something that people appreciate. And as I said, is the platforming, the smaller bullets, the type of movements that certain enemies do is definitely something that I appreciate in Contra, and your point's well taken, because you do need those points. We've all been there with Contra, where you do beat the energy zone after you've gotten through lasers that seem, or fire. What would you even call those?
I don't know, like this flame torch, like bursted oil pipes with flames bursting out of them.
Exactly. NES stuff that makes no sense, but it works some.
Yeah.
But there's nothing better than not playing that game for a while and getting to the energy zone, and one of those flames comes out of nowhere, and you forgot about it, and then you come back and you're able to beat it later. And I think it's an important point about Contra, is you do need that difficulty from time to time to really want to play a game again. And so I appreciate that point.
Yeah, it's a lot of pattern recognition, of course. I think for me, one of the parts I really, really hate is on stage 7 and in the snowfield, those enemies that are on those turrets or whatever they are. So like between where those bombs are throwing on the snowfield, and then those characters are sitting on those turrets that shoot those faster red bullets at you. I just, for whatever reason, sometimes my brain just shuts down and I get hit by them. And then on stage 7, where there's those platforms, right, and there's a couple of them, and then those guys are running at you, and I hate that. So and both games you require a lot of memorization of the enemy placements and stuff. And that does help significantly with your playthrough, whether you have the ideal weapon you want to use or not. But it just feels definitely that something about the first Contra game, once you play the two games, that there is a noticeable difference in the speed. Like, I don't know if they overclocked Super C. Things feel a lot smoother and faster than the first game. It's just like you almost get psyched out. Oh, is that bullet going to come at me now? Oh, is that flame about to come out? There's a pattern to most of the stuff, but it just seems to catch you off guard sometimes.
No, I think that's one thing that Contra does really well. It surprises you from time to time. Is you think you know exactly what you're going to do, and then all of a sudden one little bullet will come out of nowhere, or there'll be a guy that will jump out of a waterfall.
Yep. And
it's frustrating, but it keeps you coming back, because you're always trying to get that next run, or that feeling that I've really taken care of this game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned those enemies that jump out at the waterfall. Stage 5 in Super C does the exact same thing when you have to get past, because there's those falling rocks. That's where I think like stage 5 feels a lot like stage 3 from Contra, just because you have the falling rocks, you have the guys that jump out from the sides. There's a few additional things in Super C, but they definitely took some inspiration in that. And yeah, at that stage, I always seem to get caught at least once by some purple enemy who just decides he's going to jump out as soon as you're platforming up, and it's like, oh, this is really frustrating. but Contra has it happen a lot more, where you're waiting for those those moving platforms, like those like stone platforms. Yep. There's that one just before the end where it gets to where you're just above the waterfall, like the last stretch. I almost always have like 2 of those guys jump out at me there. Almost always. So if you're not facing their shooting to make sure you catch them right away, you just get caught, and it's just super annoying.
Oh, I know. And on that point about the stone platforms, is there's always a jump where you feel like you're one sprite away from it.
And then you miss.
and that's that overconfidence you're talking about, is you can't be overconfident in Contra. So no, and look, we're both laughing about it because it's that enjoyable. So I think your point's well taken.
Yeah. Nice.
And kind of flowing into my next point is I think it works well with what you said, and my next point is going to be alongside that difficulty as well, because it's about the weapons of Super C and how they've been kind of changed, that you can use a lot more of them and actually get far in the game using those weapons. So a good example would be the spread's been taken back, but the fireball's been increased in terms of the power that you have with it.
Right.
And then a lot of times the run is actually made easier with kind of your fireball and rapid rather than using the spread for the entire game. Even the laser itself, I do find the laser can cut down enemies a lot more. And I just find that I do enjoy switching my weapons a lot more in Super C. Whereas with Contra, you do want that spread for the majority of the game just because of a lot of things you said where enemies will pop out and you have a lot better range of what you're able to hit on screen. And so I find anytime that you lose your weapon, you're at a significant disadvantage in Contra, whereas with Super C, you can get by the game. And again, it keeps that flow going that I was talking about in my first point.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. And I think it's interesting. They did rework a few of the weapons in Super C. It's funny that you say that spread gun doesn't feel as powerful, but I feel like it's more like you know when you're pressing the spread gun too fast, so it won't spread the full bullets out. Like it'll only spread 3 or something. It feels like Super C, they reworked that so that it actually does a better job of resetting, if you will, so that it, like in Contra, it just feels like you're doing those shots and then you're down to like 2 are coming out and suddenly 4 will come out. Like it just feels much more uneven. But in Super C, it feels like they balanced it better. And then it's funny you mentioned the laser, because I feel like the laser is better in Contra. I mean, it's probably the least ideal weapon for most players. Most people do not like using the laser, but that laser on stage 2 and 4 can just absolutely decimate those wall units that you have to hit.
No, and I think that's a good point.
It sucks for the bosses. Those bosses, you might as well just die and go back to the pea shooter, because those bosses with the bubbles on stage 4, it's terrible. You can't use the laser for that, but you can for the stage parts. It's pretty useful. And then the fire's reworked, right? Like I don't know. Sorry, go ahead, but.
No, sorry. I was just gonna jump on your point about the laser, and it made me think about why I enjoy the laser in Super C, and its enemy placement. So I would say almost that the stage design is a reason why I enjoy that weapon. But you're exactly right. As soon as you said the laser, I thought of those top-down stages where if you actually take that weapon on and you shoot it, at like one of those, glass buttons or whatever they are, you kill them immediately. So I would just say with the laser is I just find I can shoot it and it's going to hit enemies in a more satisfying way. And I don't feel at a disadvantage when I'm using it in Super C.
I'll say the laser is still better in both NES games and the arcade game. Oh, that laser in the arcade game is instant death, basically. It's so hard to use.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that something that always bothers me with a lot of games is that if you have multiple weapons and you can't use 3 of them because they're just... you're gonna be at a disadvantage. I think that's always
ghouls and ghosts and super ghouls and ghosts.
Yeah, well, nobody needs half those.
Nobody needs the sword. I mean, the sword's useful if you're willing to risk getting in front of stuff, but you're likely to get caught pretty easily with the sword. But anyways, yeah, you're right. It's almost like they purposely do that, right? To throw your game off to some degree. It's interesting. A very low percentage of players will try to beat all of Contra or Super C with just a laser. How do you feel about the reworked fireball? Because I hear a lot of people say they feel the fire is actually the worst weapon in Contra, and it's been reworked. I assume that they use that as player feedback to change the fireball for Super C.
Yeah, I think playing through Super C, I was really trying those weapons, and I appreciated the power of the fireball, especially with putting the rapid on it. Again, it's just that destructive feel that you get, and just how you're able to run through the game. I think that's an important point for why that game just feels a little bit different, even though it's very similar in the design of what they've done with Contra. But I think that distinction is why I hold to both games as well as I do, whereas if it was just a direct port and they didn't really change the power-ups, I think people would, like they do with Contra, just go back to Contra the entire time and not give Super C a look. But I do find the Fireball a lot of fun to use in the first game, just with that extra spread that it has. But I do just like the power if you get to a boss with the fireball, you know that you're going to be able to take it down if you give it a few select shots.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just that feel that I know I'm getting something good if I lose my spread gives you a lot of confidence to kind of push through to another stage. So I'm a big fan in both games. Like I say, I don't mind using the fireball in the first game. I just find that with enemy placement, if you miss an enemy, you're kind of at that point where, oh no, I'm going to have to jump, I'm going to have to get out of the way of this. Whereas with the fireball and Super C, it's a lot faster to reset, like you said about the spread in your last point.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two fireballs is I like them both. I know a lot of people don't like the fire in the first game. I think it probably has to do with the speed of the weapon, but I like that it's got a trajectory. Like, it spins around, so it gives you a little bit more protection, like when you have enemies that jump at you and things, because you don't have to be as accurate. It gives you a bit more range to hit things. But I do see, like, because when you're hitting an enemy and you see like it'll do the first curl and then it'll stop because it'll hit something. So I get it. It's not completely accurate. Maybe that's what players want. But then in the second game, I appreciate the fireball for having that sort of splash damage part, like when it hits something.
Yeah.
So the problem is you have to be pretty accurate with that fireball. Like, if you miss and it just hits open air, you're probably going to get tagged with something. But if it at least hits a wall, hits another enemy, you might get lucky, and that splash damage might block whatever is coming next. So it was an interesting change, and they've never gone back to that old fire. Like Contra 4 has the same kind of fireball, right? And that double fireball where it's like a huge fireball that comes out. But Contra 4, I think the best weapon in Contra 4 is the double machine gun. Is just so ridiculously overpowered in that game. But
yeah, it's a great port, and I wish that I had like an accessory to put that on the big screen because it deserves it.
Mm-hmm.
But
you might have to find a nefarious way. There is a nefarious way to get it onto a larger screen.
Absolutely, but for me, just being able to play on a bigger screen, as I feel like Contra 4, that would be one of those staples that we'd probably have alongside this.
Yeah, it would be cool with that game, but Contra 4 might be my favorite, actually. Like, that's what I'm saying is that it's so well done and it takes all the good things. But again, that's a different game entirely. But it needs a big screen update, and I think that would be one of my games that I wouldn't get off the shelf if that was the case. So. Yeah, and it could easily do it because you don't need the touchscreen, right? You just need to. We have a lot of shooters now that are on the Switch, for example, that you can put into Tate mode or what have you, right? You can turn your monitor, so you could do that with with Contra 4, right? You just need to. The only thing I found with that game is when the bullets pass through the two screens, sometimes you got that dead zone where you might not see it, and that's where you get hit. So that could probably be rectified now with the current generation of consoles. But let's get off the Contra 4 train. I will say this: Contra 4 does have a port of Contra and Super C on it, which is amazing. Yep. By far the hardest versions because everything is so tiny, and you have to play it on one screen on your DS. Even with the largest screen, it just feels so frustrating. Like, I beat both of them. I don't know how, because they're so frustrating. I think I spent weeks trying to finish both games because the bullets are so much smaller, and there's a difference with holding a controller, right? When you're used to playing a certain game with a controller and then you go to play it on a handheld, it just does not feel at all the same. And so I might find the same with if I play Contra 4 on a controller, I might be like, oh, this feels weird because that was no opportunity to do that. But yeah, by far for me the hardest ports are those two ports.
Yeah. No, last point I'll make as we get back to just my point about the weapons is the rapid upgrade in Super C feels so much better for most of the guns, barring the machine gun obviously, but every gun feels like it's a lot faster. The spread recharges, the fireball feels just overpowered. And even the laser has its advantages with the rapid upgrade. So I really appreciate kind of just how they reworked the weapons upgrades in Super C.
Fair enough. Okay, my last point, and a lot of these points are very difficult to argue, like really definitively that this is why this game is better than the other game. And of course you can debate and choose what your preference is. and I feel that the soundtrack for Super C is really, really, really good, but it doesn't come across as memorable to me as the Contra first game does. If I'm, sometimes you'll get a song stuck in your head. I can't think of, like, except for maybe the first stage in Super C that gets stuck in my head, because I think it goes back to your point of everything being so frenetic in Super C and being arcadey, that you're so entrenched in the gameplay that the music is there, but it just doesn't resonate as strong for me. So I feel like the soundtrack of the first game just kind of has a little bit more rawness to it, and it's a little less in the background, and it's a little more prominent. And of course, you get the two probably most iconic sounds in Contra come from the first game with the opening theme, the explosion sound and the short little tune, and then also when you finish a stage, that's like super iconic, right? When you finish the stage with your and they kind of rework it a little bit for Super C. It's a little bit more refined in Super C.
Yep.
And again, this is a hard point to debate. I'm having a hard time really saying like that Contra is definitively better than Super C's soundtrack, but I do feel like there's something about the Contra music that just kind of fits the motif so well and just really emphasizes like the zones really well. Yeah. But again, like, I'm having a hard time saying that Super C has bad music, because it doesn't. It just doesn't. Like, I'm thinking of like the spider boss theme in the third stage is really good, but I don't know. Again, I'm not being as, I don't know. I'm having a hard time defending this point as much as the others, I think.
No, but I would say I wish I could disagree with you, but just as going through them, for the final time, even today going through them, just the minute that you hear the snowfield stage or the energy zone, there's a weight to them, just in terms of like, I'm getting further in the game, and there's almost like this push to keep on going. I think that just the way that they've arranged the music on Contra,
WATERFALL is really good too.
Yeah, has just, I feel like it separates itself, especially with the environments, as I do feel one of the points that would go against Super C is that it feels very mechanical.
Yeah.
The whole game, where very gray, very blue, whereas Contra, with every stage as it changes, there's a lot of color, and I think that adds to when you get a different song. Mm-hmm. But it just feels like the songs build better in the first Contra game. And just as I said, my examples of Snowfield and Energy Zone, you just feel that you're getting somewhere, and there's you want to get to that next stage to see where it goes. Whereas with Super C, it doesn't feel as refined.
Well, the back end of and that's actually a good point, is just the general flow of the stages. The back end of Super C is pretty much all alien areas. You have like really, the last three stages are all really focused on like the alien aspect of everything. And the first half is, you're right, it's kind of like you're in a, I don't know, military base, or like there's just not a lot of variety as much. Like there seems like there's a more of an organic feel in the first game, where okay, you dropped in the jungle, now you got to go through this after you blow up the tower thing, you're going through the tower, so that makes stage 2 make sense. Then you get to the waterfall, and then after you blow up the enemy on the waterfall, you're jumping inside. It's another tunnel type thing, because you're jumping in. Okay, there's a lot of like, like it goes back to back. It makes a lot of sense. Whereas Super C just feels like, here's a bunch of cool stages, just go through them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just a good point. There's a variety on Contra that I think it just holds up really well. Mm-hmm. I would counter that though, because it's not one of my other points, is just the boss design on Super C. They just feel more immense.
Yeah, they do.
They feel like there's something going on.
Yeah, they do as well.
And I think that's kind of the contrast, is even though the level design on Contra is better, I do like the bosses of Super C a lot more, in terms of it just every one gets bigger and better.
Yeah, they don't feel as generic for sure.
Yeah, and so it's just it's a valid point though, as I find myself when I play Contra is the music just has you kind of humming along as you're playing, which allows it to be more of kind of an organic feel, and you get more involved in the game.
That's a great point about the bosses for sure. I think that although Contra as a whole is far more iconic, as you get later in the game, a lot of the bosses are pretty terrible. Like you have that snowfield UFO thing, then you have the giant robot that you just jump over and shoot, and he just throws those spikes at you and jumps once in a while. Then you have the stage 7 one is absolutely ridiculous. It's just a panel on a wall that you can just walk right up to and just destroy right away. It's and the last area has pretty iconic with the heart, the beating heart or whatever. That I would say was probably one of the best bosses. That the final boss in Super C is pretty bad, honestly. Like it's not very. It looks cool, but it doesn't pose really any challenge or anything. But as a whole, yeah, the bosses are way better in Super C.
Well, that's where a cutscene maybe would have helped to explain what the thing is and where it came from. But again, that's Nintendo games as a whole. It's just let's throw up whatever we can to make it look cool and make
it's a cool design. It's sort of like the space jockey from Alien, sort of, but then there's like a face on it, like the Devil's Crush face on it. Like it's neat, but it's too bad that it doesn't really pose any challenge compared to a lot of the other bosses.
No, it definitely has kind of that H.E. Geiger feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what they were going for, is having a lot of those alien type looking objects. And so no, I think again is just as we're talking, is you see we go on the music, but then it gets to the bosses, and it's just there's a lot of contrast in terms of where it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'd say that my last point would be the contrast end when you look at Super C with the top-down levels and how different they are than the sub-levels of Contra. And that would be my last point of just, I'll throw out a couple names for you, and you can see where I'm going with this as I look at something like Guerrilla War, Heavy Barrel, Ikari Warriors, Mercs.
Yep, Mercs is a good one.
And Gunsmoke, the list goes on and on.
Yep.
Is you just have a lot of, I just enjoy the top-down levels, and I enjoy just that feel of running through something, and Contra with your power-ups does such a good job of giving you a different feel in the game entirely, and I'm a big fan of that in NES games. As you go back, something like the game Bayou Billy that we talked about with the different sub-levels, it makes a huge difference in just that variety, and you do look forward to the stages, I find, a lot more than you do in Contra.
Mm-hmm.
And then just how you're able to destroy the bosses in the top-down levels is a lot of fun for me as well.
Well, stage 2's boss. But to counterpoint that, I think some credit is definitely due to the first Contra, because I don't want to say it's the easy way, but there was already a template to do those top-down stages. There were plenty of games that you just listed that could do that. I can't think of another game that really tried to utilize a 3D, I mean, there's like 3D World Runner and stuff like that, but it's a little bit different, but tried to use almost like a 3D scope to present a stage. And they're not my favorite by any stretch, but it's interesting that they tried something of that concept to fit on an NES game. And the weird thing is, so Contra 1 has that, and then they went back to that format for Contra 4, but then Contra's Super C, and then Contra 3 stuck with the top down. So it's interesting. They kind of keep flip-flopping, like, oh, we like doing this, but then we don't, and then we want to go back to this. I assume if there was a 3DS Contra game, they would have utilized that again, the more the tunnel style stages. But it's funny how they keep flip-flopping between the two.
Well, I think as well though is, I think they've always tried to find that balance between giving you a different game entirely within stages, but also finding that there's limitations to both that you do. And again, I listed off 4 or 5 games, so the originality kind of goes out the window when you start talking about those top-down stages. But with the 3D type stages that you're mentioning, as I do find you're not able to do as much. And I think that range of motion in Contra, being able to shoot everything on the stage, get to a different side of the stage, really keeps it in that frenetic, I'm a guy with a machine gun, let's go and you know, kill something. I think that goes a long way in terms of the overall feel of just the 80s action movie trope that I've always loved. And plus it's probably Super C was the first game that I played, so I probably have this better nostalgia towards that top down rather than the 3D plane that's there. But I just don't find that the originality in the substages of Contra meets the level of what you get with the top down stages in Super C. Like the third top down stage where you're fighting that boss where the worm comes out of the kind of skull arms. That boss alone, just design wise, is something that just wouldn't be done in Contra, just based on what kind of stage it is. Whereas the bosses of the substage in Contra are computer-based formats that I think take away from the overall alien feel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that part for sure.
How about yourself? Where do you stand on that? I know that you just mentioned about kind of the plane, 3D plane being something that you enjoy, and then going on to the other games. Do you have a preference? Is there something?
Same as you. Super C was the first of the two that I ever experienced, and I got, if you will, trained by somebody to play Super C. So there was a kid that had the game and knew basically all the ins and outs. And at the time, we used to use the 10 lives code because it just helped a lot. But knew where the next spread gun was coming. This kid was like really good at Ninja Gaiden as well. Could actually finish it. So this was a big deal for a lot of people. So I have a bit more of that nostalgia as well for just the top down, just because it's the first experience I had. So when I actually got my copy of Contra for free. I forget, it was like in a garbage can or something. And so I just cleaned it up and it worked.
Right.
Well, it was in the garbage can and just cleaned it up. It worked just fine, right? Actually, I think I got Super C for free now, too. And I think I got them both for free, which doesn't happen anymore. But
we all miss those times.
Yeah, those times are hard to find. The dumpster dive games are few and far between now, that's for sure. But so yeah, definitely the nostalgia piece is there. So, and the first time you experience the more tunnel type stage, it's a little jarring. But I appreciated just it was so different than what you might experience on 99% of other NES games. Everything was, right to left or just in a 2D plane. So this provided a different game style that we just didn't see very often. But as a whole, yes, I think that they understand and utilize that 2D plane a lot better on the top-down stages. I won't get into the top-down stages on Contra 3 because I hate those stages so much.
Yeah, no. I won't get into them either. I was just about to go on a rant about one of the stages, and you're exactly right. Let's just leave that off.
Yeah, no, that's another day in of itself. I did a podcast with my friend Murugata553, and he really, really, really likes Contra 3. Like, it's one of his favorite games. And for whatever reason, I can't stand that game. I hate that game. And it's a lot of similarities with Contra 4, and I love Contra 4. So I don't understand why. I do not like Contra 3.
Yeah, it's weird, and I won't stay on that point, but I think Contra 3 versus Contra Hardcore on the Sega Genesis would be a great debate as well.
It's probably no debate because I don't really like either of them, so I don't have anything I can say.
I love Hardcore. I think it's one of the better games, and I've beaten all the endings, and it's just a game that I just have a lot of fun with, and I actually spent a month about a year ago just playing that game nonstop, and it brings a lot of good memories. Let's just say that.
Nice. Well, and I know we won't get too much further down the Contra pipeline, but I know I really liked Hardcore Uprising, and I remember introducing that one to you, and I know you have to get around to getting a copy for yourself. But that one's definitely very different than all of the other Contra games in a lot of ways, but I don't know, something about that game I really appreciate too.
Yeah, no, I got to get into that one. For what we played of it, it was excellent, and I'll say it again. Thank you for upgrading my PS3 to get it back to HD.
Well, now you can get some good games before whenever that store finally decides it's gonna shut down. You better get some stuff on there.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's really great. I guess final thoughts, like what would you be if you had to choose between the two? Where would your loyalties lie in this debate?
You know, it's hard. I'm ultimately going to stick with Super C, but just the variety of Contra makes it extremely difficult because, like I said, there are some really memorable moments in Contra. I love the bosses on the snow stage. I just think that Contra provides a lot of things, and it's a different game. All the platforming, the difficulty, but with Super C, the arcade feel, just that overall robotic feel. I just think that everything is made to be destroyed in a very quick and efficient manner, and it always provides me with a good time. And I find myself that when I need a game to play, if they're sitting side by side, I'm going to go with Super C just because I love the spread, I love the fireball, and then I love the enemies of just the way they come out and just how large they are. There's just a lot of variety on that game, and I think just again the bullets, just overall it just has that very explosive, very grand feel to it, and I think it's hard to get a game that's as easy to pick up and play. The controls, it just works really well, and I'm a kid of the arcade, so I got to go with a game that just feels pure arcade, and that's Super C.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to stick with Super C as well, and it's probably much more with the nostalgia reasons, not because Contra is a bad game, but I do appreciate the refinement of Super C, and just that it feels a little cleaner in its presentation. It's faster. You can see the bullets that are coming at you because they flash through different colors. The pea shooter is a little less stressful if you're stuck with it, and although yes, the stage variety isn't as nice as Contra, and my absolute probably most hated part in any Contra game period is in Super C, and that's that stupid crushing ceiling in stage 8. Like I probably lost hundreds and hundreds of lives just mistiming a jump, or those aliens that fly right at you and they don't fall in the pit, they hit you, or those orbs, right? Because you decided to stick with the spread gun instead of going with the flame shot, and I hate that part. But as a whole, I love Super C a little bit more. But and I would probably pick it if I had to pick between the two. But I do not go wrong playing Contra at any time.
That's a great point. I think the last question I'd have for you, and it's just something that kind of popped in my head, is where do you think Super C would stand if it was called Contra 2?
I'm not sure. I'm not too sure if it would have made much of a difference. Because if I think about it, some sequels of games just didn't get the same notoriety. Just for whatever reason, they just didn't. And if it could be because of when they were released. Like you think of things like DuckTales 2, Chip and Dale 2. They came out late, so people didn't know about them. Power Blade 2, whatever. Star Tropics 2. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Like if it said Contra 2, yeah, I'm not too sure.
I just always have found it curious is that as a younger kid, even looking at Super C, is you always knew it was a Contra game, but it always felt a little bit different, like a cousin of it. And just the fact that it didn't say Super Contra was always weird. And I think that would it have had, like, when you talk about Contra, everybody seems to have had a copy back in the day. But with Super C, and the weird thing is, us being based in Canada, is it feels like all of us had a copy of Super C before we had Contra. But I just wonder about the fanfare of it if it was a direct sequel. I know but in terms of just having that Contra name on the title, and what that would have made. But again, I think your point's valid, and just you can't go wrong with either one. They're just games that I absolutely love. I think they're the type of games that, you know, when you put your top 10 lists together, even though, what is that with the NES? There's probably about a good top 100.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but maybe top 25 to 50.
I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that just it's
You
like,
also like a lot of crap games like Total Recall, so, so you can easily
hey,
make your personal top 100. I don't know if a lot of other people can.
everyone should go spend that $3 to $5, get yourself a copy of Total
Well, if
Recall.
you can get it for free, Total
Well,
Free
if you
Call.
can get it for free, it's worth it. But back in the day when you rented that game and you got beat up by guys a third of the size, that wasn't a good experience. But
Some of those Christmas wish lists I get from you, I'm like, you sure? You sure this is what you want?
well, when you're at that point now, what do you play? Like, it's either you get a Total Recall or you get something like
Let's just
Dr.
say
Fate.
last year your list included Ring King, and like, you know, Ring King's not exactly a. I know you because you have enough games at this point that you're going for some of the either right at the bottom of the barrel or just at the cusp.
Hey, you know, one of my favorite moments was showing my wife the cutscene between the rounds on Ring King.
Yeah, well, we might have to wrap up at that point. So,
Absolutely. Everybody needs a good Ring King reference rather than talking about Super C. So,
I'm sure we've all played some game that we spent far more time than we probably should have on and enjoyed a lot more than the average person might have. But yeah, let's wrap up our sort of pseudo debate here, I suppose. So thanks for coming up with those Super C points. I appreciate that, and I think there's probably still tons and tons of other points we could have made, and there are a lot of things that we could identify as draws, right? That you could say, yeah, like really, it's very hard. It's a coin flip between the two games, and ultimately, the points you made versus the points I made could be looked at upon by somebody that these are actually strengths versus weaknesses, or they're weaknesses versus strengths. So we'd love to hear some feedback on what game people prefer themselves, and just to hear those reasons why.
yeah, I think the most important thing is just keep on playing those games. You know, they're timeless, and like I said, because of those games, we've talked about maybe 4 or 5 of the extra Contra games that just are classics, and I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks about these games. And like I said, after this podcast, I'm probably going to play some Super C just to get it out of my system.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well, for Swordfish and myself, Sushi, thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you down that road.
Have a good one, guys.